Throughout the 1930s, Hitler preyed on the hopes and concerns of Western democracies. Whenever the Nazi dictator seized new territory, he would declare that his requests had been met. Following moving into the Rhineland, Austria, and Czechoslovakia, Adolf Hitler shifted his attention to Poland in 1939 after World War I, when the Allies cut the Polish corridor out of German territory to provide Poland access to the sea. While Soviet leader Joseph Stalin agreed to a compromise, Hitler requested that the Polish corridor connecting Germany and Poland be restored. Germany and the Soviet Union agreed to split Poland in a secret clause of the deal. They also agreed that the USSR could take Finland and the Baltic countries of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. After the signing of this non-aggression agreement, Hitler pressed forward with his plan. However, Stalin was nervous about allying with the West because he had been promised territory by Hitler. He had also been denied entry to the Munich Conference and had been promised territory. He launched a surprise attack across the Polish border on September 1, 1939, which German tanks and army trunks protested. 2 days later, on September 3, France and Great Britain declared war on Germany, but before they could act, Poland collapsed. Germany then put its lightning war strategy, known as the Blitzkrieg, to the test. The Blitzkrieg called for the use of fast-moving aircraft and tanks, followed by overwhelming infantry troops, to surprise and quickly overwhelm the enemy's defenses. Hitler took control of the western half of Poland, and on September 17, Stalin sent Soviet soldiers to capture the eastern half of Poland. After that, Stalin started annexing territories to the north of the Polish border. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia fell without resistance, but Finland resisted. Stalin sent about 1 million Soviet soldiers into Finland in November, but the Soviets assumed a swift victory, so they made the obvious mistake of not being prepared for winter battle. Outnumbered and poorly equipped, the Finns battled valiantly for their country in the bitter winter months. Soldiers on skis immediately attacked Soviet positions. The Soviets suffered in heavy snow. By March 1940, Stalin made Finland submit, and the French and British armies began to mobilize. There was little to do as tired Allied soldiers looked eastward toward the enemy, and equally bored German soldiers looked back from their Siegfried Line a few kilometers away. They had stationed their forces along the Maginot Line, a chain of fortifications spanning France's border with Germany. The Germans mockingly referred to it as the Sitzkrieg, or Sitting War. Some publications simply referred to it as the Fake War. The silence ended on April 9, 1940, when Hitler unexpectedly invaded Denmark and Norway. 4 hours later, neither country resisted. Instead, both sides fell in line. In preparation for an invasion of Britain 2 months later, the Germans constructed bases along the Norwegian and Danish coasts. In May 1940, Adolf Hitler launched a dramatic invasion of the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. It took the German forces 10 days to travel from there to the northern coast of France. After reaching the French coast, the German forces swung north once more. All of this was part of the plan to attack France while keeping the Allies' focus on those countries. Hitler then sent an even larger force of tanks and troops to slice through the Ardennes. This was in a heavily forested area of northern France. Luxembourg and Belgium were moving through the forest. In one of the most heroic acts of the war, Great Britain sent 850 ships from England to Dunkirk under the direction of the British Navy to rescue the soldiers who were stranded at the bottom of the ocean with no way out. 338,000 exhausted soldiers were saved in the boats, but after Dunkirk, French resistance began to crumble. On June 14, the Germans captured Paris, accepting the French leader's inevitable surrender. A week later, the Germans took over the northern part of the country, leaving the southern part to a puppet government led by Marshal Philippe. After France was defeated in World War I, Britain was left to fight the Nazis by itself. This French war hero In an inspiring speech, the new British Prime Minister Winston Churchill said, "We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and the streets, we shall never surrender." However, Hitler had already decided to invade Great Britain. First, he wanted to destroy the Royal Air Force before sending more than 250,000 troops to invade England. Germany's Luftwaffe bombed Britain in 1940, initially focusing on British airfields and aircraft factories before turning their attention to the cities, particularly London, mainly to demoralize the British. Despite damage and casualties, the British did not recoil, and the Battle of Britain lasted until May 10, 1941. The British resistance in the Battle of Britain taught the Allies a crucial lesson: Nazi assaults could be stopped. As a result, Hitler's strategy in Europe was altered. Hitler, stunned by the British resistance, called off his attacks and instead concentrated on the Mediterranean and Eastern Europe. He initially chose to engage with Great Britain before turning to the Mediterranean, the Balkans, and his ultimate goal, the Soviet Union. Hitler had to intervene to save his Axis partner Italy, so he sent General Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps to them to reinforce them. In late March 1941, Rommel's Afrika Korps launched a surprise attack on Italy. This was primarily because Italy had been struggling to maintain control on the eastern side. Not expecting after a bloody battle for Tobruk, British forces withdrew to Bruk, Libya, but by mid-January 1942, Rommel had returned to his original position. By June 1942, the battle's tide had changed once more, and Rommel had regrouped, driven the British across the desert, and taken Bruk. For his achievements in North Africa, Rommel earned the moniker the Desert Fox. While he was engaged in battle there, other German generals were also engaged in battle elsewhere. Hitler made efforts to increase his dominance in the Balkans in order to be prepared for the invasion. By early 1941, through the threat of force, he had persuaded Bulgaria, Romania, and Hungary to join the Axis powers Yugoslavia and Greece, which had already established bases in southern Europe, for an attack on the Soviet Union. However, mostly to ensure that the British did not interfere, Hitler made moves at expanding his dominance in the Balkans. Yugoslavia and Greece, which had pro-British governments, resisted. Thus, in early April 1941, Hitler invaded both nations. Yugoslavia collapsed in 11 days, and Greece submitted in 17 days. By early 1941, he had forced Bulgaria, Romania, and Hungary to join the Axis forces. Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's plan to invade the Soviet Union, could proceed once the Balkans were under his control. On June 22, 1941, the assault began with the roar of German tanks and bombers, but the Soviet Union wasn't prepared. Leningrad was besieged by German forces on September 8. The city was cut off from the rest of the Soviet Union for more than 2.5 months. Despite having the largest army in the world, its soldiers were undemanding and poorly trained. Week after week, the Germans advanced until they had crossed 500 miles into Soviet territory. As Soviet soldiers retreated, they set fire to and destroyed everything in the enemy's way. This was the same tactic the Russians had used against Napoleon. German armies besieged Leningrad on September 8. The city's connection to the rest of Communist Union at the time, there were more than 2.5 million people residing in the city, and Hitler was prepared to starve them to death in order to force a surrender. German bombers destroyed food storage depots, and the city's famished residents started eating cat and dog food, cattle feed, and eventually crows and rats. Adolf Hitler, frustrated with the city of Leningrad's slow progress, shifted his attention to Moscow, the Soviet Union's capital and the site of 1 million casualties during that winter. General George Zhukov launched a counterattack as the weather turned colder, ignoring Napoleon's winter defeat 130 years earlier, and the Germans retreated. On October 2, 1941, the Nazis attacked the city. By December, they had reached the outskirts of Moscow. At that point, Germany had already conquered or controlled nearly half of Europe. However, Hitler sent his generals a shocking order: no retreat. German soldiers dunk in about 125 miles. Adolf Hitler's foray into the Soviet Union was fruitless and cost the Germans 500,000 lives. Then, there was the pressure from the United States, which came early in 1943, when it was obvious that the tide was turning. The Battle of Stalingrad was the first significant setback for Hitler. His entire Sixth Army was either destroyed or taken prisoner. At the same time, a joint British-American force landed in northwestern Africa. The addition of an Italian front made the rollback of German forces on all fronts in the Soviet Union that much more likely. By May 1943, German and Italian soldiers in North Africa were prepared to surrender. The following summer, the Allies broke the back of the German submarine campaign in the Atlantic. A day later, on July 10, Allied forces touched down in Sicily. 2 weeks later, Mussolini was overthrown. And in early September, the Italians withdrew from the war. When Allied bombing raids on German cities forced the retreat of numerous fighter planes, German forces had already lost their aerial supremacy. The final nail in the coffin came on June 6, 1944, with the D-Day Normandy landings, when Germany lost everything it had earned during the conflict. Subscribe this channel to get more interesting and learning videos. Thank you.